philosophers by day, predators by night. That is the hidden truth of ancient Greece no history class dares to teach. In the world we're taught to admire marble columns gleam under the Mediterranean sun, and democracy sings its bright hymns of liberty. But behind every pillar, shadows coil like serpents, whispering stories that never make it into the textbooks. This is the dark history. They don't want you to know that the same men who shaped the principles of justice, logic, and virtue also bought and broke children, transforming beauty into currency and innocence into a commodity traded in the secrets of civilization. Imagine opening your eyes to stone walls slick with the scent of sweat and old olive oil, feeling the cold bite into your bare skin. Your ankle shackled raw and bleeding, while laughter echoes somewhere above you. A cruel laughter that belongs to the free men debating ethics by day and purchasing flesh by night. You're 15, but you've stopped counting birthdays because time stops meaning anything when you become property. In ancient Greece, child slavery wasn't a secret. It was business woven seamlessly into the splendor of art philosophy and the famed Greek symposiums that history books paint as glamorous gatherings of enlightened minds. But behind the poetry and politics lay a truth soaked in terror, where the brilliance of civilization cast a darkness deep enough to swallow young souls whole. This is not just a story from 2,500 years ago. Because when you scrape away the marble, when you silence the speeches of philosophers, you find that the machinery of exploitation still hums beneath the polished surface of modern life. We are them. They are us. And tonight we're going back into the marble halls to reveal the darkest secrets of ancient Greece and to remember the nameless boys whose suffering built the very civilization we still celebrate today. They never tell you that in ancient Greece, sometimes your story begins not in marble palaces or grand symposiums, but under a sun so merciless it turns soil to dust and hope to something brittle enough to snap. They never tell you that the same civilization we celebrate for birthing democracy and philosophy also sowed seeds of despair in quiet villages where olive trees grew old and gnarled, their roots wrapped around secrets of civilization darker than any epic poem ever dared to sing. This is the dark history hidden behind the brilliant facades that poverty could become a prison and a single drought could become a death sentence for a child's freedom. In villages scattered across the valleys of ancient Greece, families lived on the edge of survival, where every harvest balanced between abundance and catastrophe. And then the rain stopped. Day after day, the sun blazed overhead like an unblinking eye of the gods, shriveling barley stalks, drying wells, leaving groves of olive trees bearing only small wrinkled fruit. And in those days of relentless heat, fathers began avoiding their children's eyes, while mothers clutched them tighter at night, trying to push away the inevitable. Because in ancient Greece, there was a hidden truth. Debt wasn't measured only in coins, but sometimes in the soft weight of a child's body. The slave traders arrived like vultures circling a dying animal draped in clean tunics, ledgers clutched in ink-stained hands, eyes scanning villages for youth and beauty that could be turned into profit. They called it commerce. The villagers called it survival. It happened in dusty village squares where a man who once mended tools or tended goats now stood trembling beside his child, silver gleaming in the hands of strangers as they inspected teeth, prodded muscles, appraised eyes like jewels. A 12-year-old boy was promised a better life in the city, where he'd supposedly learn skills, earn wages, and return home a man. But the truth was simpler and crueler. In ancient Greece, beauty was currency and childhood was a commodity. That's the hidden truth behind those marble columns and lyrical hymns to democracy. In the slave markets of Athens, a boy wasn't someone's son anymore. He was merchandise labeled by age, strength, and whether his face might tempt a wealthy master. Punchline. The same hands that wrote the philosophies of freedom counted silver coins to buy boys like cattle. Parents driven by hunger and drought sold their children to buy one more season of life. And in those moments, ancient Greece's golden age gleamed like a dagger in the sun, beautiful and deadly all at once. That's the dark history no one teaches in school. And it's only the beginning. Because Athens wasn't just the city of Socrates and Pericles, it was the beating heart of a marketplace where flesh became wealth, where children vanished into houses whose marble halls hid the true cost of civilization. And that's where I was taken. Into a house where philosophers spoke of virtue by day and demanded entertainment by night. We were led away before sunrise, chained together by iron collars, stumbling through dust and dew as the sky turned from violet to bloody gold. This was ancient Greece's hidden truth, that freedom and democracy were luxuries reserved for those born on the right side of the marketplace gates. For the rest of us, the journey to Athens was the beginning of an erasure each step, stealing pieces of who we used to be. The traders didn't speak to us, except to bark orders prodding us forward with sticks, while the older boys kept silent eyes hollow as abandoned temples. The younger ones sobbed until their throats turned raw, or until a blow taught them silence. We passed fields that would have been beautiful under any other circumstance, rolling hills, draped in olive trees, seas shimmering like scattered silver coins. But none of us saw any beauty. Our world had shrunk to the rhythm of feet scuffing stone, the metallic rattle of chains, and the sick certainty that home was a place we'd never see again. That's the dark history no one etches into the marble reliefs. Punchline. The same civilization that gave birth to philosophy also gave birth to human trafficking as an institution. At night they drove stakes into the ground and chained us in place like livestock while traders sat around fires counting silver, whispering about which boys might fetch the highest price. Sometimes strangers came into the circle of firelight, well-dressed men smelling of wine and saffron, their eyes moving over our faces like merchants inspecting pottery. They lifted our chins, examined our teeth, traced fingers across shoulders and arms, speaking softly in languages we barely understood. I remember the humiliation of being turned around as if I were a piece of meat, the traders discussing my age, my strength, my features as though I couldn't hear every word. It was the hidden currency of civilization, youth, beauty, and fear. When we reached Athens, the noise of the city slammed into me like a storm. The slave market was an assault on every sense. The clash of metal coins, the scent of sweat dust fear, and the bright sting of olive oil poured over bodies to make skin glisten under the sun. Naked men, women and children were lined up in rows, each tagged like produce at market stalls. Buyers argued loudly, pushing and elbowing for better views, shouting prices over one another, as though the flesh they purchased didn't carry memories or dreams. Punchline. In ancient Greece, a child's worth could be measured in silver and innocence could be auctioned off to the highest bidder. They cleaned me, oiled my skin, and pushed me into the lineup among boys my age, each of us trembling eyes darting for some sign of mercy that never came. The auctioneer boomed details of our bodies, our age, our region of origin, our pleasant appearance, while strangers reached out to examine us. When Lysander's bid finally won me, he didn't even look me in the eyes. His fingers were already counting silver coins, his smile full of quiet triumph. And though I didn't yet know the shape of my fate, I understood one thing. With a clarity sharper than the Athenian sun, in this new life I would never again be seen as a human being. But that was merely the entrance to the labyrinth, because beyond the slave market lay the marble halls of my new master's house, a place where shadows hid far darker secrets than any I'd yet seen. They led me into Lysander's house through gates tall enough to make any man feel small, past courtyards paved in marble so polished they reflected my own trembling face back at me like an accusation. This was ancient Greece's hidden truth, that behind the beauty of architecture and the hymns of poets lay corridors designed to imprison rather than free. As I stepped deeper into the house, the air changed, filled with the scent of burning incense, roasted meat, and something subtler like fear soaked into the very stones. The walls were alive with frescoes of gods and heroes, their painted eyes following my every step as if judging how easily I'd break. Punchline. In the house of a Greek nobleman, the line between civilization and cruelty was drawn thinner than the threads of a silk tunic. Demetrius the overseer towered over me, a man who wore his own scars like armor, each mark a chapter in a story of survival and submission. He spoke in a voice sharp as a blade, laying out the rules that would define my new existence. I would rise when ordered, sleep when allowed, speak only if spoken to. I would never look a free man directly in the eyes. And above all else, I would serve the master and his guests in any capacity they required. The meaning behind those words lay thick in the silence that followed, the same silence that pulsed through marble halls at night when certain doors were opened and certain footsteps crept closer. There were others like me, boys, whose beauty or obedience had spared them from harder labor, but condemned them to a different kind of suffering. Marcus, my own age, his eyes bright yet hollow, spoke to me in hurried whispers when Demetrius wasn't near, warning me about the guests who came for the symposiums. Alexios, older, carried scars crisscrossing his arms, telling me that resistance was noble, but survival was necessary. And Philemon, barely 14, who had once been the son of a merchant, but now bore the same haunted stare I saw in every polished mosaic of the house. Punchline. They called it the Greek Symposium, a place for wisdom debate and the pursuit of virtue. But for us, it was a stage set for our humiliation. Each symposium began with philosophical discourse, the guests reclining on couches sipping wine as they discussed democracy, the nature of justice, or the poetry of Homer. Yet the longer the night wore on, the more the conversation twisted wine, loosening tongues and unleashing desires hidden behind flowing robes and golden signet rings. I learned that the same men who praised virtue by day demanded entertainment by night, entertainment that had nothing to do with music or dance. In the silence after the guests' laughter died, you could hear the quiet sobs of those chosen to serve in ways no child should ever understand. The house itself seemed to breathe, its painted ceilings echoing with prayers whispered in dozens of languages by boys trying to remember who they'd been before chains took their names. That's the dark history scrubbed clean from the records, the hidden truth no teacher recites. And as I stood there surrounded by gods painted on plaster and shadows lurking between columns, I knew my story in this house was only beginning, because the next time those symposium doors opened, it would be my turn to step into the light. The night they called me into the symposium, my heart slammed against my ribs so hard I thought it might shatter bone. The voices of the guests floated out through the marble corridors like music from another world, laughter mingling with the rich aroma of wine-roasted lamb and burning resin. But beneath that glittering facade lay ancient Greece's darkest secret, that beneath the poetry and philosophy, boys, were currency traded not merely for labor, but for pleasure sacrificed on the altar of civilization's hidden truths. Demetrius appeared in the doorway, his silhouette framed by flickering torchlight, his voice cutting through my fear like a blade. "Come. The master requests your presence." That was all he said, but I felt as though he'd handed me a death sentence. My legs moved because they'd been trained to obey, not because I wanted to step into that room. Punchline. In ancient Greece, they measured a boy's worth by how well he could entertain the men who wrote the laws of virtue. I entered the symposium trembling, my eyes trained on the floor, trying not to see the faces of the men reclining on low couches draped in purple and gold. They discussed the nature of justice and the ideal form of government, while their fingers toyed with jeweled cups and idle thoughts of what they'd do to the young bodies standing obediently around them. The contrast burned itself into my memory, because that was the hidden truth no marble frieze would ever display. That the same men who quoted Socrates with wine's sweet breath could reduce a boy to an ornament to be used at their leisure. A voice called me closer. A man with silver hair and soft hands, his smile gentle as he asked where I came from, whether I missed my family, how I liked my new home. His questions were weapons disguised as kindness, each one drawing me further in, until his fingers were tracing the line of my jaw, then moving lower. My answer stuck in my throat as he pulled me onto the couch beside him, the others falling silent to watch. Punchline. It wasn't philosophy they wanted. It was the thrill of breaking something beautiful. Laughter rose around me like a tide as the man's hands roamed places I didn't want touched, and though my body stayed there, my mind fled to olive groves and childhood sun. I heard one guest boast that a boy's spirit could be tamed with enough silver and enough humiliation. Another recited lines of Homer even as his eyes devoured me. By the time they were done, I didn't know whether the tears on my face were sweat or sorrow. the room blurred with torchlight and the metallic taste of fear. And that was the moment my childhood died, a moment not marked by a single blow, but by the knowledge that my body no longer belonged to me. That's the dark history scrubbed clean from the glories of Athens, the hidden truth buried beneath democracy's shining praise. But the night wasn't over, because the symposium was only the beginning, and what lay beyond it would test the fragile remnants of who I used to be. In the months that followed that first night, something inside me began to fracture hairline cracks that spread like fault lines through stone, each new symposium widening the rupture until I barely recognized the boy who once believed the world was good. That's the hidden truth about ancient Greece they don't carve into marble. The destruction of a soul is as deliberate and systematic as the building of a temple. By day, I carried trays of wine-cleaned mosaic floors, stained by the footprints of men who spoke of virtue while concealing appetites as dark as the shadows between the columns. By night, I learned to read the shifting moods in a room, to anticipate when laughter would curdle into hunger, when philosophical debates would dissolve into demands for entertainment that had nothing to do with music or dance. Punchline: the same voices that praised democracy decided which child would be devoured next. The other boys and I developed a language of glances and silent gestures. Warnings passed between lowered eyes, a fleeting tilt of a chin that meant a guest was dangerous, a tremor in a voice that meant someone hadn't come back whole from the last gathering. We were ghosts haunting our own bodies, forced to exist in the liminal space between invisibility and the constant threat of being noticed. Some nights I lay awake on my straw pallet, staring at the ceiling, listening to the muffled sobs that seemed to seep from the very stones. I'd try to remember my mother's face, my father's laugh, the cool wind sweeping through olive groves under a sky bursting with stars. But the images grew fainter with each passing day, replaced instead by torchlight flickering across silk robes and the taste of fear. Punchline: in ancient Greece, forgetting who you were wasn't weakness, it was the only way to survive. Some boys retreated entirely, becoming shells that obeyed every command without question, their eyes blank as uncarved marble. Others tried to bargain for small privileges, softer bedding, a sweeter piece of fruit a night spared from the guest's attention. But all of us learned the same lesson: resistance would only invite pain far sharper than obedience. I watched Marcus once defy an order and pay for it with bruises so deep he limped for weeks. And I saw Alexios chained in the courtyard for 3 days without water because he refused to perform for a guest who wanted him humiliated in front of the others. The house thrived on fear, and Demetrius knew how to wield it with precision, using unpredictability as his sharpest tool. Sometimes he'd offer kindness, a piece of honeyed fig, a gentle word, only to snatch it away the next moment, reminding us that hope was more dangerous than despair. That was the dark history buried beneath Athens' reputation for brilliance, the hidden truth behind every marble statue standing serene and noble under the Greek sun. Yet even in that darkness there were flickers of something defiant, a whisper of songs and forgotten languages, a secret name spoken between trembling lips, a tiny sculpture hidden in a crack in the wall. Because some part of me refused to die completely, no matter how deeply I buried it. And I sensed that the worst was still to come, that the true depths of this house's cruelty waited beyond the next symposium, in chambers where no laughter could ever reach. As my second year under Lysander's roof bled into the third, I began to feel myself dissolve into the marble floors and painted walls like pigment flaking from a fresco no one cared enough to restore. That's the dark history no one records in ancient Greece, how a boy could die long before his body ceased to breathe. I moved through corridors where columns rose like silent sentinels carrying trays of wine to men whose voices dripped honeyed words about virtue, while their eyes devoured anything young and trembling. I learned the art of invisible service, how to anticipate desires before they were spoken, how to pour wine without making a sound, how to let my mind slip away even while my body remained obedient. Punchline: in ancient Greece, survival demanded that you become both present and absent, a ghost forced to smile. The guests came and went like shifting tides, some with hands as soft as velvet, others reeking of sweat and cruelty. all of them bound by one common thread: they believed their brilliance excused their appetites. Their conversations danced between politics, art, and the geometry of ethics, but sooner or later, the symposium always bent toward shadows, and the cost of their entertainment was paid in pieces of our souls. I began to recognize the patterns of this hidden economy, where a boy's price rose or fell depending on the newest arrivals at the slave market, how the traders calculated which faces would fetch the highest bids, how the overseers gauged which boys could be broken quickly and which ones might require special measures. Punchline. The same city that built the Parthenon also perfected the mathematics of human despair. Sometimes Demetrius took me with him to the slave market, not as a customer, but as proof of how well a boy could be trained. I stood behind him as merchants displayed new shipments of children, their small bodies shining with olive oil, eyes wide with confusion and terror. Demetrius would nod thoughtfully, discussing muscle-tone temperament and potential for household service, his words cold as coin. And the strangest thing was how numb I felt, as if the boy who once trembled on the auction block had finally severed his last connection to who he used to be. I watched other boys stare at me as though I might offer them hope, but they didn't realize that survival and living are two entirely different things. In ancient Greece, to survive was to carve away pieces of yourself until nothing remained but obedience. And sometimes I wondered if death might have been a kinder fate. Yet even as I perfected the art of submission, tiny sparks of memory still flickered: my mother's voice, my father's laughter echoing off mountain cliffs, the sweet taste of figs stolen in summer. Those fragments refused to die completely, even if they grew fainter with each symposium, each touch I endured, each order I obeyed. That's the hidden truth lurking beneath the statues of heroes and philosophers, that behind every marble grin lies a story soaked in blood and silence. And as I stood beneath painted ceilings wearing a tunic meant to display me rather than clothe me, I realized that my usefulness was beginning to fade, and that in the world of secrets and shadows, a slave who no longer captivated attention often faced a fate even darker than servitude. By the time I reached what might have been my 25th year, though time had become a concept as distant as the stars, I realized that something essential inside me had gone utterly silent. That's the hidden truth of ancient Greece. No marble inscription admits that a person can keep breathing long after everything that made him human has been scraped away. I moved through Lysander's house like a shadow, smooth and silent, my motions perfect, my eyes lowered, my words carefully measured. Punchline. In ancient Greece, the perfect slave was the one who no longer remembered he'd ever been free. Guests still arrived for the symposiums, though many no longer bothered to glance in my direction, drawn instead to newer faces whose spirits had not yet been ground into dust. I'd become efficient, predictable, invisible, a tool as reliable as the silver cups I polished until they glowed. And this, I learned, was the final stage of survival: complete erasure of the self. The overseers no longer needed to threaten me. I had internalized the rules so deeply that I obeyed without thought. I knew the precise way to tilt my head in submission, how to sense a guest's mood before a word was spoken, how to arrange fruit on a platter so its colors pleased the eye of a man who might moments later demand acts no child should know. The household operated like a machine, each slave slotted into a silent hierarchy. The newest arrivals bore the worst of the demands, their beauty and terror still fresh currency. Those who survived long enough might be granted safer duties in the kitchens or workshops, provided they learned to smile on command and extinguish any flicker of resistance. Punchline. In ancient Greece, your entire worth depended on how well you could become someone else's reflection. I saw boys rise in favor, only to fall when the masters, tired of them, traded away to harsher fates in mines or quarries, or simply vanishing without explanation. The walls of Lysander's house held more secrets than any scroll in the libraries of Athens, secrets of civilization, carved into silence and pain. Sometimes I'd catch glimpses of myself in the polished bronze mirrors, an older face, eyes, sunken hair, clipped short skin, marked by the faint shadows of old bruises. But there was no recognition. The boy who once raced goats along mountain ridges under sunlit skies was gone, replaced by this quiet figure who measured every breath, calculating each moment for the safest outcome. Punchline. The same city that boasted democracy built invisible prisons inside human minds. Yet in the rare quiet hours when moonlight spilled through the narrow slit of my cell window, I'd feel those old fragments stirring memories flickering like tiny lamps struggling against an endless darkness. I'd remember my mother's hands weaving baskets, my father's voice telling stories of gods and monsters, the simple joy of wind in my hair. And for a fleeting instant, I would ache with the thought that I might still be more than property. But such thoughts were dangerous because hope was a crack in the armor that kept me alive. And in the shadows of Lysander's house, I was beginning to sense that my time here was coming to an end, not with rescue, but with a final journey into darkness I had tried so long to avoid. The end, when it finally came for me, arrived not as some violent storm, but as a quiet conversation in Demetrius's quarters, the way one might discuss the disposal of an old piece of furniture. That's the hidden truth in ancient Greece. No scroll ever records even the most loyal slave eventually becomes a burden too worn to keep. Demetrius looked at me with eyes that once held the flicker of shared understanding, but now only reflected practical calculation. "You're being sold," he said. "The mines in the mountains need men. You'll fetch enough silver to justify the expense." Punchline. In ancient Greece, the value of a life could be weighed in a purse of coins, and a few words spoken without emotion. My body remained motionless as he spoke, but inside I felt something shatter into 1,000 splinters, a soundless explosion of the last fragile hope I'd guarded all these years. I'd heard the whispers about the mines, the narrow tunnels choking with dust, the constant threat of cave-ins, the labor that broke bones and lungs until death became the only release. It wasn't execution exactly. It was slow erasure. A final destination for those no longer beautiful enough to entertain guests, but still strong enough to extract value from the earth. The secrets of civilization were written in those tunnels, too hidden beneath marble temples and the poetry of Athens. Punchline. The same men who recited verses about freedom built entire industries on silent screams buried underground. That night, as I lay on my straw mat, the door creaked open and Marcus slipped inside like a ghost. His face was thinner than I remembered, the lines around his eyes carved deeper, but there was still a trace of the boy I'd once met trembling on his first day in this house. He pressed something cold and small into my palm, a piece of metal sharpened to a point barely more than a sliver of hidden possibility. He said nothing because words were dangerous in Lysander's house, but I understood everything he meant. Punchline. In a world built on chains, even the tiniest piece of freedom gleamed like gold. I lay awake until dawn, turning the metal shard over and over between my fingers, weighing choices that all tasted of blood. I could try to run, though I knew the chains were tight and the guards watchful, and the price of failure would be torture beyond imagination. I could bury the shard into the flesh of a master, tasting revenge for every stolen night and every scar etched onto my skin. Or I could use it on myself, ending my story on my own terms, rather than fading into darkness in some forgotten shaft of rock. But even as those thoughts swirled, I felt the weight of Marcus's gesture, the quiet trust he placed in me. And in that moment, I chose neither escape nor vengeance nor death. Instead, I hid the shard where others might find it one day, passing forward the slim chance that someone else might choose a different ending. Because that's the hidden truth buried beneath ancient Greece's marble perfection, that even in a world designed to crush us, the smallest acts of defiance carry echoes no master can silence. And as the first rays of sunlight spilled through the iron bars, I knew my journey was not yet done, for the road to the mines awaited, and there the secrets of civilization would be written not in philosophy, but in the dust of collapsed tunnels and the whispered names of those the world forgot. The journey to the mines began under a sky the color of molten bronze, the sun rising over the ridges of the mountains I'd once crossed as a child without chains. That's the dark history no tour guide shares about ancient Greece, how the same roads that carried philosophers to Olympic Games also bore chained caravans of the condemned. As our guards herded us forward, my eyes caught glimpses of landscapes that clawed at memories buried deep inside me, olive groves shimmering in dawn light, narrow streams gliding over rocks, polished smooth by centuries' valleys, echoing with bird calls that once lulled me to sleep in my village. Each sight was like a wound reopening, reminding me that before I became property, I had a mother who sang to me, a father whose laughter rang out as he fixed a broken fence, and dreams as vast as the Aegean Sea. But now all I carried was the weight of iron on my ankles, and the knowledge that I was heading toward a place where names, faces, and the past itself disappeared into black tunnels. Punchline. In ancient Greece, they called it civilization, but for some, it ended at the mouth of a mine. When we finally arrived, the mining camp sprawled like a festering wound across the mountainside, the air thick with dust that burned my lungs at every breath. Slaves crawled out of narrow shafts, faces gray with exhaustion, bodies bent as though the weight of the earth itself rested on their shoulders. Overseers shouted commands, whips snapping in rhythms as precise as drum beats in a temple procession. The secrets of civilization were buried here in the rock dust, in the groans of collapsing beams, in the way a man's cough could become a death sentence. I quickly learned that here the quotas were impossible, designed to extract every ounce of strength until flesh gave way. Food was rationed to keep us alive, but never strong. Water was precious as silver handed out in measures that barely wet a cracked tongue. Punchline. The same men who erected statues to the gods sent children to die in darkness for the gleam of marble and bronze. Yet even in this hell I discovered glimmers of resilience. The slaves had carved out a secret life amidst despair. They shared stolen crumbs of bread, whispered songs in languages our masters tried to erase, and passed along scraps of information that could mean the difference between survival and death. Some etched tiny figures into the rock walls, images of mountains animals, or the faces of loved ones left behind. It was their way of refusing to vanish completely, of declaring that even if our bodies were claimed, our memories and stories belonged to us. I became part of this silent brotherhood, carrying tales of Lysander's house, of the symposiums, and the marble rooms where philosophers feasted while boys wept. My voice joined theirs in the shadows, retelling the hidden truth behind ancient Greece's dazzling brilliance. Because that's the dark history, no triumphal inscription records that entire cities were built upon the bones of the forgotten. And as I descended into the mines each day, feeling the ceiling pressing closer overhead, I began to wonder how much longer my breath would last in the dark, and whether in the end, my name would survive at all. But even then, a tiny part of me clung to the hope that my story, spoken in whispers among the condemned, might echo far enough to be heard beyond the tunnels into a future that refused to look away. The end did not come with a single blow, nor with a heroic escape, but with the slow erosion of my breath, ground away like the stone walls that closed around me deeper in the mines each day. That's the hidden truth about ancient Greece. No poet ever sings how death can creep in quietly, not as a warrior with a sword, but as dust that burrows into your chest until even the act of drawing air feels like drowning. My cough grew harsher. As weeks turned into months, a rasping sound that echoed off the narrow rock passages, mingling with the metallic clink of chisels and the distant rumble of falling stones. My limbs ached with a deep weariness, every step in those tunnels burning like fire in my joints. Punchline. In ancient Greece, death wasn't always a spectacle. It was often a fading into silence, unseen and unrecorded. The overseers noticed when my pace slowed, eyes narrowing as they calculated how many more days of labor they could squeeze from me before I became another corpse to haul from the shafts. Food portions shrank, orders became sharper. The same civilization that built marble temples to immortal gods had perfected the art of discarding lives no longer profitable. Yet amidst this creeping demise, the slaves around me became my family, their whispered words the only warmth left in that sunless world. In the brief pauses between shifts, we huddled together, sharing fragments of who we used to be. One man spoke of fishing boats on the Aegean, another of mountain paths lined with pine trees and wild thyme. We kept each other's stories alive like fragile flames flickering in a storm. Punchline. The secrets of civilization were never just written in scrolls. They were carved into the memories of the forgotten. As my strength waned, I found myself telling my story more often. my voice a thread stitching me to the others, binding us into a silent rebellion against the erasure our masters demanded. I spoke of Lysander's house of marble corridors, echoing with the laughter of men who praised virtue while they consumed innocence. I spoke of the symposiums of the painted gods, staring down as we were made to perform, of the cold floors where I lay afterward, wondering if the stars I once counted as a boy were still shining above Athens. And as I spoke, I saw in the eyes of those around me, not just pity, but a fierce determination that our stories would not vanish entirely. Punchline. In ancient Greece, slaves were property, but memory was one thing no chain could bind. Eventually, my cough became a constant companion, the pain in my chest blooming like a dark flower, leaving me gasping for breath after each shift. I knew the overseers were debating whether to send me deeper into the shafts or simply leave me behind to die where I fell. Yet even as my body faltered, my mind clung to one desperate truth, that perhaps someone somewhere might hear our voices echoing from these tunnels, carrying forward the hidden truth of who we were. That's the dark history woven into the brilliance of Greek civilization, the knowledge that for every temple standing proud against the sky, countless nameless lives were ground into dust beneath its stones. And as I lay one night against the cold rock, feeling the earth trembling with distant collapses, I realized my time was almost over, but my story wasn't. Because the echoes of the forgotten have a way of traveling farther than any master ever intends, reaching places even marble cannot silence. In the end, my body surrendered quietly, not in the blaze of some grand revolt, but in the hush between hammer strikes deep within the mine, where stone dust hung so thick it turned the world into a fog of gray. That's the hidden truth. Ancient Greece never engraved onto its marble reliefs that entire empires could rise on the silence of the dying, each breath snatched away without witness or mourning. As my lungs burned and my vision blurred, I thought of how my life had once been measured in seasons, in the sweetness of figs ripening under mountain suns, in the gentle murmur of olive leaves trembling in the breeze. Now it was measured in coughs and the number of steps I could still take before my legs buckled. Punchline. In ancient Greece, a boy could be born under the same sky as philosophers and still die unseen in darkness for the price of a single silver coin. Yet even as my body failed, something deeper kept beating inside me, a final pulse of defiance refusing to vanish into the cavern walls. I realized that while my masters had stripped me of my name, my homeland, my childhood, they had never fully claimed my memories. And that was the dark history they could not erase, the power of a voice telling the truth, even in whispers. As I lay in the dark, I remembered every man who had passed through Lysander's halls, the wealthy citizens draped in silk, quoting Plato and praising virtue even as they broke boys like pottery. I remembered how they used the Greek symposiums as theaters of cruelty, how they spoke of democracy while transforming children into entertainment. And it struck me how nothing had truly changed, how the same blueprint of exploitation still hummed beneath the polished surface of modern life. Punchline. The same civilization that invented democracy also perfected the art of disguising cruelty behind beautiful words. Today we speak of freedom and human rights, yet in hidden corners of our world, children are trafficked across borders, forced into labor, sold into systems that devour them just as completely as the mines devoured me. We build shining cities, celebrate technological triumphs, and flood the internet with images of progress. But behind the screens, there are still invisible chains rattling in shadows. Our modern secrets of civilization are coded into supply chains obscured by corporate slogans and sanitized in legal documents, yet the cost remains the same: human lives traded for comfort, profit, and convenience. Punchline. We tell ourselves we've evolved beyond barbarism, but the truth is we've only learned how to hide it better. And as I felt my breath growing shallower, my chest heaving under the weight of stone dust and sorrow, I understood that my story wasn't mine alone. It was the echo of countless voices silenced before me, and countless more crying out today, waiting to be heard. My dying wish as my eyes fluttered shut for the last time was that someone somewhere would listen, that someone would remember that behind every marble statue, every gleaming monument, there lies a dark history written in suffering. Because that's the hidden truth. No civilization wants to admit that progress has always been paid for in flesh and silence. And though I knew my body would vanish into the dust of the mines, I clung to the hope that my story, carried in whispers and memories, might yet slip free of these tunnels and reach a world brave enough to look into the shadows. For even in darkness, a single voice can become a spark. And my spark was not yet entirely extinguished, because the world beyond these stones was still listening, waiting for truths that refused to stay buried. And so though my breath finally slipped away in the choking dark of the mines, my story did not die with me. Because that's the hidden truth. No empire wants its people to remember that stories are seeds, and once planted, they grow in the cracks of even the strongest marble. My voice joined an invisible chorus that still murmurs beneath the grand pillars of history, a whisper insisting that ancient Greece's brilliance was built on the broken backs of the forgotten. Punchline. The same civilization that wrote poems about beauty turned children into merchandise sold in sunlit squares. But my story doesn't belong to ancient Greece alone. It belongs to every age, because the blueprint of exploitation never really vanished. It simply changed shape, learned new languages, cloaked itself in new lies. Today we dress cruelty in legal terms and economic jargon, hiding the same ancient pattern behind modern words like supply chain and labor force optimization. Children still vanish into systems that feed the comforts of the powerful, just as I disappeared into Lysander's marble halls. Punchline: dark history never disappears. It only updates its costume for a new audience. There are smartphones in pockets, glowing with apps built on invisible suffering clothes hanging in shop windows, sewn by trembling hands, and products stamped ethical by corporations who know precisely how to bury the truth beneath paperwork and marketing campaigns. We praise ourselves as enlightened, civilized, evolved, but the hidden truth is that the hunger for power, pleasure, and profit still devours the vulnerable, just as it did in the days when philosophers debated virtue while purchasing boys like livestock. Punchline. We've traded marble columns for glass skyscrapers, but the shadows remain exactly the same. And that's why I beg you to remember me not for pity nor for tears, but as a warning carved into the walls of time. Because every civilization, no matter how grand, writes its triumphs in ink made of other people's suffering. We must look past the shining facades, the beautiful rhetoric, and ask the hardest questions. Who paid the price for the things we take for granted? Whose blood lubricates the gears of the systems we praise as progress? My life was stolen to fuel the illusions of Greek greatness. But today, millions live unseen in the world's blind spots, their existence erased by our willingness to look away. Punchline. The cost of our comfort is always hidden, and silence is what keeps the system running. I may have died nameless in a tunnel beneath ancient rock, but my truth lives on in the hidden histories waiting to be unearthed. I need you to carry this spark forward. Speak the names of the voiceless. Question the stories you've been told. Refuse to let beauty blind you to the shadows, because only by acknowledging the darkness can we hope to break its hold. And as the echoes of pickaxes fade into silence, I know that somewhere beyond the marble and the dust, someone is listening. Perhaps it's you. And perhaps you'll be the one who keeps our stories alive, so that even if my body has vanished into the earth, my voice and the voices of all those like me will never again be buried in the dark. For this is not just my story, it's the story of humanity itself. And it's time the world finally listens not only to the glories carved in stone, but to the hidden truth trembling behind every monument's shadow. And so as my breath faded into the stone dust swirling in those ancient tunnels, my final thought was this: that every empire, no matter how glorious, is haunted by voices it tries to silence. That's the dark history. No monument will ever confess. Civilizations carve their legends in marble, but bury their crimes in forgotten graves. My story is not a relic locked in the past. It's a living echo vibrating through time, demanding to be heard. Punchline. The same hands that built democracy once chained children in darkness, and we dare not forget it. When we look at the grand temples of ancient Greece or the verses praising freedom and beauty, We must remember the hidden truth behind those wonders, that beneath each polished stone lies the dust of countless lives sacrificed for glory. The same pattern repeats itself across centuries, shifting forms, but never its core human suffering turned invisible so that the powerful can thrive. Today we speak of progress, of human rights, of a civilized world, but our comforts are still tangled in supply chains that hide modern slavery, in industries that profit from shadows, in systems designed to consume the vulnerable and erase their names. Punchline. We call ourselves advanced, but civilization's secrets have always been written in blood and silence. I want you to understand that my life, my pain, my stolen years, were not meaningless. They are a testimony that even in the darkest places a human voice can survive, insisting on truth when the world wants only silence. The marble columns remain standing, the philosopher's words still quoted in universities. Yet my story and the stories of boys like me flicker just beneath that surface, waiting for someone brave enough to listen. And so I ask you, whoever you are watching this video from your own corner of the world, to look deeper. Question what you've been taught. Recognize that every shining civilization casts shadows. Punchline. Dark history isn't dead. It's hiding in plain sight, woven into the fabric of our daily lives. Remember me not only as a boy lost to history, but as a reminder that humanity's truest test lies in how it treats the invisible, the powerless, the voiceless. Let my story be the spark that lights your curiosity, that makes you ask who pays the price for the things we call progress. Speak about what you discover. Refuse the comfort of ignorance. Carry our names forward, because memory is resistance. Punchline. The secrets of civilization can only stay hidden as long as we keep our eyes shut. And as my last thoughts dissolved into the darkness, I found a strange peace, knowing that stories have power greater than chains. That even when bodies fail, voices can travel beyond time and reach new ears. And perhaps in the glow of your screen, my whisper has reached you. That's the hidden truth no empire can bury, that the smallest voice carried across centuries might yet change the world. And though I died beneath stone and silence, I believe that someone somewhere will keep telling our story until the darkness finally gives way to light. Because in the end, history isn't just marble and heroes, it's the quiet truth that refuses to die. And now, I leave my story with you. And if you're still here, still listening to this voice rising from the dust of forgotten tunnels, then know this. My story was never only about ancient Greece. It is about every civilization that ever wrapped itself in marble and poetry while hiding its darkest truths behind gilded doors. That's the hidden truth. History books rarely admit that the same brilliance that gave the world philosophy and democracy also perfected systems of human exploitation so efficient they still echo in our modern age. Punchline. The secrets of civilization have always depended on silence, and it's silence that allows monsters to thrive. Today we stand in cities lit by neon and driven by technology, but the blueprint remains unchanged. Children still disappear into the machinery of profit. Invisible workers build our gadgets and stitch our clothes, and the same moral blindness that justified the symposiums now disguises itself in corporate reports and legal jargon. We praise progress while the powerless remain out of sight, their cries muffled beneath layers of convenience and distraction. Punchline. We haven't erased ancient cruelty, we've only taught it to wear a modern mask. But I believe that even the smallest spark of curiosity can pierce that mask. That's why I've told you my story, not to drown you in darkness, but to light a path through it. The faces of the boys who stood beside me on the auction blocks, who whispered secrets in dark corridors, who vanished into mines and left no names behind those faces, deserve to be remembered. And not just remembered, but spoken of, questioned, investigated. Because only when we drag these truths into the light can we ever hope to break the cycle. Punchline. Dark history loses its power the moment we refuse to look away. So I ask you, yes, you watching this right now, to carry my story further. Tell someone about the hidden truth behind ancient Greece. Share what you've learned here. Dig deeper into the past and don't stop digging when you hit marble floors. Ask who profits and who suffers in every system that calls itself civilization. And when you see exploitation dressed as culture or injustice, hidden beneath elegant words, remember that my voice and the voices of countless others are still speaking, demanding to be heard. Because my story is not ancient history. It's still being written in sweatshops and refugee camps and silent rooms where decisions are made to trade human lives for profit. Punchline civilization is measured not by the beauty of its monuments, but by how it treats those it wishes to keep invisible. And as this video fades to black, I leave you with a single plea. Be the one who refuses to forget. Be the one who questions. Be the one who listens for the whispers beneath the marble. And if this story has stirred something in you, if you feel the weight of these truths pressing against your chest, then don't let that feeling die in silence. Like this video, share it with someone who still believes history is all glory and heroes. Subscribe if you want more hidden truths unearthed from the shadows of time. And leave me a comment below telling me where you're listening from, because I find it incredible that across centuries and continents we are connected by the same questions, the same hunger to know what lies beneath the surface. This is not just ancient Greece's story, it's ours. And together we can ensure that the voices buried in darkness will finally be heard in the light. And so as my voice dissolves into the echoes of stone and dust, I leave you with one final truth, that every civilization, no matter how dazzling, stands balanced upon the same fragile fulcrum, the choice between compassion and convenience, between remembering and forgetting. That's the hidden truth that ancient Greece never carved into its marble inscriptions, that a society can write poetry about freedom and build monuments to virtue, even as it grinds countless souls to powder beneath its shining surface. Punchline. The secrets of civilization are not hidden in shadows because they're small, but because they're too vast, too ugly for polite society to stare at for long. As I lay dying in those mines, I realized that my story was never just mine. It was the story of every child sold to save a starving family, of every person reduced to a commodity so others could dine in comfort or decorate their homes with beauty. And that story has not ended. Today we tell ourselves we've advanced beyond such barbarism, but the same machine keeps turning, fueled by invisible labor, hidden chains, and a million small acts of looking away. Punchline: dark history is not a relic. It's the engine still humming beneath our modern world. We marvel at technology and innovation, but we rarely ask who picks the cobalt for our devices, who sews the seams of the clothes we wear, who scrubs the floors in places we never see. And while politicians speak of liberty, children are trafficked across borders, vanishing into networks as invisible and ruthless as the slave markets of Athens. The faces may change, the currencies may evolve, but the transaction remains the same one: human suffering traded for another's comfort. I want you to remember that my story, the boy dragged from olive groves into marble halls whose laughter was traded for silver, is not just a cautionary tale from the past. It's a warning flare fired into our present. Punchline. We have inherited the brilliance of ancient Greece, but also its blind spots. My dying hope was that someone somewhere would dare to see both, to see the statues and the scars, the poetry and the screams, and to understand that true civilization does not live in marble or philosophy, but in how fiercely we guard the dignity of the smallest, the weakest, the unseen. And so I beg you, do not let my story become just another curiosity, lost in the sea of digital content. Let it be a wedge that pries open the hidden truths we'd rather not face. Speak my name and the names of all who never made it into the history books. Punchline. The silence that hides the secrets of civilization is powerful, but so is one person who refuses to stay silent. If this story has moved you, let it spark conversations that matter. Share it. Question the narratives you've inherited. Dig deeper than the marble. And remember that behind every statistic, every historical triumph, lies a human face, a human heart, a human cost. Because until we look squarely at the shadows, history will keep repeating itself in new and even more sophisticated disguises. And as my voice fades, I trust that yours will carry forward what mine can no longer say. Because in the end, the future of civilization depends not on monuments of stone, but on the courage to remember the dark history written between each gleaming line of triumph. And perhaps in speaking these truths, we might finally build a world worthy of calling itself civilized. And so, as the dust of the mind settled over my silent chest and my story slipped into the unseen folds of history, I realized that the true weight of my life would never be measured in silver coins or bruised flesh, but in whether the world would dare to remember me. That's the hidden truth ancient Greece and every empire since tries desperately to conceal, that the greatness of civilization is built not only on triumphs, but on the lives it consumes and the voices it silences. Punchline. Behind every shining monument, there's a ledger of suffering written in invisible ink. As I drifted toward the edge of my last breath, I saw with brutal clarity that my name might fade, but my story did not have to. Because stories are living things. They slip through cracks in marble, seep into whispered conversations, spark questions that refuse to die. And it struck me then that the true secrets of civilization are not buried under stone, they're hidden in plain sight in the stories we choose not to tell, in the truths we train ourselves to ignore. Punchline. Dark history survives precisely because it hides behind beautiful lies. Today, we boast of a civilized world of progress and enlightenment, yet we still trade human lives in backrooms and boardrooms. We wear clothes stitched by invisible hands, scroll endlessly on devices built from minerals, mined by children who will never know freedom. We applaud speeches about human rights while entire industries depend on the suffering of the unseen. The blueprint remains unchanged from the days of the Greek symposiums, when men who spoke of virtue in public treated human beings like toys in private. And so I say this. If you've heard my voice echoing through these words, then you are now the keeper of this story. Punchline. The secrets of civilization belong not only to historians, but to anyone brave enough to see past the marble. Let my fate be the question that gnaws at your conscience when you hear leaders speak of progress, when you marvel at architecture, when you walk through museums displaying artifacts stolen from lives like mine. Let it drive you to look deeper, to ask who paid the price for the beauty you see. Because true civilization will never be measured in temples or treaties, but in how fiercely we defend the humanity of those who stand unseen at the margins. My story is a warning and a gift, a testament that even when every freedom has been stripped away, a voice can still carry through centuries, carrying truths too dangerous for marble to record. Punchline. The only thing stronger than the chains of civilization's secrets is the courage to speak them aloud. So as my story fades into the hush between heartbeats, I leave you with this final plea: do not let history's darkness slip quietly into the past. Speak my name. Share this truth. Refuse the comfort of ignorance. Because every time you choose to look deeper, to challenge the polite stories, to ask uncomfortable questions, you shine a light into places that have remained hidden for too long. And perhaps if enough of us keep telling these stories, the marble might finally crack, and the secrets of civilization will no longer be secrets at all. For that, I gave my life. And now, I place the weight of my truth into your hands, hoping that you'll carry it forward into a world that still has a chance to remember what it means to be truly human. And now, as the dust of centuries settles over the stones and silence begins to swallow my voice, I leave you with the most dangerous truth of all, that the hidden history of ancient Greece was never truly about marble columns or golden age philosophy. It was always about power, the power to decide who matters and who disappears. That's the dark history no civilization wants inscribed in its chronicles, that beauty and cruelty often thrive side by side, and that the secrets of civilization are not buried deep. They're right here, woven into the choices we make every day. Punchline. The same hands that shaped democracy once chained children beneath marble ceilings. My life, once measured in the laughter of olive groves and mountain winds, was stolen piece by piece until I became another shadow, swallowed by the system that called itself enlightened. But I need you to know that though my body turned to dust beneath the earth, my story is not dead. Because stories like sparks leap from one soul to another, igniting questions too fierce to be extinguished. And that's what terrifies those who profit from silence, that someone might finally listen and, worse, still speak. Punchline: dark history loses its power the moment we choose to say its name aloud. Today we swipe our screens and marvel at the digital wonders of our world, but behind those glowing pixels lurk supply chains as brutal and hidden as the markets where I once stood trembling while strangers bid on my childhood. We wear fabrics woven by invisible hands, devour delicacies harvested through hidden suffering, and call ourselves civilized while pretending not to hear the faint echoes of chains rattling across time. It's easy to believe that ancient horrors belong to another age, another people. But the truth is more relentless. The blueprint of exploitation has merely evolved learning new languages, cloaking itself in corporate slogans, and burying its victims under legal abstractions. Punchline: the hidden truth is that modern civilization is just as hungry for shadows as the marble halls of ancient Athens. So I beg you, don't let my voice fade into the archives of forgotten tragedies. Let it unsettle you. Let it gnaw at the edges of your comfort until you're compelled to ask the hardest questions. Who profits from my convenience? Whose freedom was stolen so I could scroll, shop, and live my life untroubled? Because the secrets of civilization only survive as long as we choose to look away. Punchline: one person daring to look deeper can unravel centuries of silence. Share this story. Talk about it. Tear away the polite illusions that keep cruelty hidden. And remember me not as a nameless slave from an ancient time, but as proof that even the smallest voice can outlast empires. Let my story fuel yours, so that together we shine light into the corners where darkness has always thrived. And if this tale has moved you, let it become your spark for change. Like this video, subscribe to keep unveiling these hidden truths, and tell me in the comments below where you're listening from, because across continents and centuries, our humanity binds us together, and our voices have the power to break the silence. Because in the end, the marble may crack, the empires may fall, but the truth, our shared, painful, shining truth, will always find a way to rise. And that more than any monument is the legacy worth fighting for. So if you've stayed with me this far, know this: you are already different from those who choose to look away. That's the hidden power you carry, the courage to stare into dark history and refuse to let it be forgotten. Because acknowledging the hidden truth doesn't have to drown you in despair. Instead, it can become your shield against manipulation, your spark of clarity in a world that thrives on silence. Punchline: the weight of these secrets isn't meant to crush you. It's meant to sharpen your vision so you can see the world for what it truly is. And that's how we break the cycle, by transforming pain into purpose. Let my story remind you that even a single voice can challenge centuries of darkness. If this video stirred something in your chest, if it left you angry, thoughtful, or yearning for more, then don't let that feeling slip away. Drop a comment below and tell me what you're thinking. Save this video to revisit the truths hidden beneath civilization's marble mask, and subscribe, because together we're building a community that refuses to stay silent. Punchline: don't just witness history be the voice that changes how it's written.